What would you do if someone handed you a chocolate bar and told you it was a weapon of war? Not a metaphor. An actual battlefield weapon more demoralizing to your enemy than artillery, more psychologically devastating than any propaganda. A Hershey's bar that helped crush the most sophisticated military machine ever built. Please subscribe to keep us going forward. December 11th, 1941, 4 days after Pearl Harbor. The marble halls of Berlin's Reich Chancellery echo with laughter. Adolf Hitler declares war on the United States, and in the gallery, German generals exchange glances, not of concern, but of barely concealed amusement. They've studied American forces, a peacetime army of 175,000 men, ranking 17th in the world, smaller than Portugal's. National Guard units training with wooden rifles and trucks painted with the word tank. One general leans over and whispers a joke about cowboys and Indians. They're looking at a nation that will field 16 million soldiers in 4 years. A force larger than the entire population of some European nations. An army that will overwhelm them not with Prussian discipline, but with something the Germans never anticipated: chocolate bars. Here's what makes this story fascinating. The German military establishment was right about American soldiers. They were undisciplined. They questioned orders. They chewed gum on parade grounds and read comic books in barracks. They were, as one captured German general said, civilians in uniform, and he meant it as an insult. But those civilians, those amateurs, that motley collection of factory workers and farm boys, would destroy the Wehrmacht, and the Germans wouldn't understand what hit them until it was too late. This is the story of how democracy weaponized abundance, how 16 million amateurs humiliated the professionals, and how a terrible-tasting chocolate bar became the symbol of everything the Germans had gotten wrong about modern warfare. The German military of 1941 was the most sophisticated war machine the world had ever seen. 2 years, they devoured Europe with mechanical precision. Poland in 5 weeks. France, victor of the Great War, in 6. Their officers studied Clausewitz at war colleges. They came from families that had served the Kaiser, the Reich, military virtue itself. To them, warfare was a profession requiring generational expertise. When General von Rundstedt reviewed intelligence on American forces, he dismissed them with a single German word: unkriegerisch, unwarlike. This wasn't entirely unfair. The American military tradition was fundamentally different. Citizen soldiers who took up arms in crisis and returned home when danger passed. An army that believed wars could be won by enthusiasm rather than expertise. American soldiers who talked back to officers, who maintained casual informality that would result in court-martial in any proper European army. But the Germans made a fatal error. They confused informality with incompetence. They saw the surface and missed the industrial capacity beneath. They looked at 130 million people and saw only shopkeepers and farmers, not understanding that those shopkeepers knew logistics and those farmers knew machines. The transformation began December 8th, 1941. Lines formed outside recruiting stations in every American city. Men who'd spent the Depression riding freight trains suddenly had purpose. Within 72 hours, the trickle became a flood. 600,000 volunteers by month's end. The numbers: by end of 1942, 3.8 million men under arms. By 1943, 9 million. Eventually 16 million, 12% of the entire American population. Germany had mobilized 13 million over the entire war. The United States matched it in half the time while maintaining the civilian economy that would feed Britain, the Soviet Union, and every allied nation. The Germans hadn't prepared for this. They'd calculated that American soldiers would be soft, that they'd break under real combat. Numbers, they believed, couldn't compensate for expertise. 1 million poorly trained soldiers would just die faster than 100,000 professionals. They were about to learn something about modern warfare that their sophistication had blinded them to. The Americans approached it differently. War wasn't just about soldiers, but systems, supply chains, logistics, the unglamorous mathematics that Germans had overlooked, factories that made cars retooled for tanks. Women who'd never worked outside homes became welders. The nation that invented mass production applied it to warfare itself. Consider the Liberty Ship program. Traditional shipbuilding, 1 vessel per month per shipyard. Henry Kaiser redesigned the process using prefabrication and assembly lines. By 1943, 1 Liberty ship every day. In one demonstration, they built the SS Robert E. Peary in 4 days and 15 hours. 4 days. The Germans watched this across the Atlantic and couldn't comprehend it. Their U-boats hunted Allied shipping with ruthless efficiency. But for every ship sank, 3 more appeared. Aircraft production. In 1940, Roosevelt called for 50,000 aircraft per year. Germany's military experts openly mocked it. Germany, the most industrialized military power in the world, produced 10,000 annually. Surely Roosevelt's number was fantasy. By 1944, American factories were producing 96,000 aircraft per year. A German pilot shot down over France would bail out, be captured, watch dozens of American planes pass overhead. More aircraft than his entire squadron possessed. Casual abundance that violated every economic principle he understood. Every American soldier received a Hershey's ration D-bar in his field kit, specially formulated to withstand heat, provide emergency calories, tasted terrible deliberately, bitter so soldiers wouldn't eat it except in emergencies. But to German soldiers who found these bars on captured Americans, they represented an economy so vast it could divert sugar and cocoa, luxury goods in rationed Europe, to create emergency rations for millions of men. German troops by 1943 were fighting on watery soup and black bread. Standard Wehrmacht rations deteriorating as homeland economy collapsed. And here were American soldiers carrying chocolate like it was nothing, casually sharing it with prisoners, unaware this simple gesture was more demoralizing than artillery. The first test came November 1942. Operation Torch. American troops land in North Africa. The Wehrmacht watches with satisfaction. Americans walk into German trap at Kasserine Pass. Field Marshal Rommel orchestrates devastating counterattack. American units reel backward in confusion. Communications break down. Units separate. German after-action reports note Americans, when surprised, often surrender quickly. Assessment confirmed, brave enough but lack cohesion and discipline. Amateurs playing at war. But Rommel noticed something else. The Americans learned quickly. Units that retreated in February were different in March. They'd absorbed lessons, adapted tactics, incorporated mistakes into new doctrine. General Fredendall relieved, replaced by George Patton. Within weeks, same units fighting with increasing effectiveness. Rommel wrote in his diary that Americans possessed flexibility German forces lacked, willingness to discard doctrine that didn't work, embrace new methods without rigid adherence to precedent. American officers, he noted, seemed less concerned with protecting reputations than with winning battles. By Sicily invasion, July 1943, transformation undeniable. But Germans encountered something unexpected: American logistical dominance. Wehrmacht operated on living off the land, using captured supplies. Americans brought everything. They unloaded prefabricated harbors, built roads, bridges, fuel depots with mechanical efficiency. A German officer captured near Salerno expressed astonishment at sheer volume. His unit had been reduced to scavenging fuel from abandoned vehicles, mixing gasoline with alcohol to keep tanks running. The Americans had so much fuel they used it to run generators for electric lights in field hospitals, to heat water for showers in rest camps, to power bulldozers carving roads through mountains. Excess on a scale that seemed obscene to soldiers surviving on scraps. Nazi racial theory taught that democracy made men soft, that racial mixing produced inferior stock, that American individualism was fatal weakness. They expected an army of weaklings. What they encountered: black soldiers fighting with distinction, Japanese-American 442nd Regiment becoming most decorated unit in U.S. history, soldiers whose parents spoke Italian, German, Polish, bringing immigrant skills to military problems. Germans had created military force based on ethnic uniformity. Americans created one based on organized chaos, and it was working. The bars appeared everywhere. German soldiers found them in abandoned foxholes, pockets of captured wounded, scattered across battlefields like confetti. Some ate them immediately, starving men grateful for calories. Others saved them, traded them, turned them into currency, but all understood what they represented. Not just food, but proof of resources beyond imagination. Americans could afford to give every soldier chocolate as standard issue. Not reward, not special occasion, but expected equipment possibly thrown away if not needed. More demoralizing than propaganda could counter. June 6, 1944. Normandy beaches become proving ground for everything Germans believed about American incompetence. Omaha Beach validates every assumption. American troops wade into machine gun fire, pinned down, unable to advance. German defenders pour fire into landing craft. Surf turns red. For hours, outcome hangs in balance. German commanders watching must have felt vindication. Americans can't sustain casualties, can't maintain cohesion, will break under fire. But they didn't break. Against tactical logic, small units began moving forward. Not coordinated waves, but individual courage accumulating into momentum. A sergeant here, lieutenant there, leaving cover to advance into killing ground. Improvised tactics. Bangalore torpedoes clearing wire. Naval gunfire directed by men waiting with radios. Tanks modified with hedgerow cutters welded from German beach obstacles. By nightfall, beachheads secured. Cost staggering. 2,000 casualties Omaha alone, but succeeded in mission Germans considered impossible. General Feldmarschall von Rundstedt. They are not soldiers, they are civilians in uniform. He meant it as insult. He was describing source of strength. German soldiers fought for fatherland, for Führer, for abstract duty and honor. American soldiers fought to go home. They fought because told this war was necessary, but also because they wanted it finished. This motivation, which German doctrine considered inferior, produced peculiar determination. Americans weren't fatalistic, didn't embrace death as glorious, were pragmatic, adaptable, motivated to survive, which meant motivated to end war quickly through overwhelming force. German soldiers saw American supply depots for first time. Not careful organized warehouses, but what appeared casual mountains of material. Ammunition stacked in pyramids, vehicles stretching to horizon, food sufficient to feed cities. Officer captured near St. Lo brought through American supply area. He saw more trucks in single depot than his entire division possessed at full strength. Gasoline stored in quantities that would have sustained his unit for months being used to fuel generators powering electric lights for mess tent. The wastefulness seemed offensive. Did Americans not understand resources were precious? But of course, Americans understood. They operated from different baseline. Abundance was their normal state. December 1944. Hitler's last offensive, designed to exploit American weaknesses. Surprise breakthrough. American regiments surrounded. At Bastogne, 101st Airborne completely encircled. No supplies, no relief. German commanders demand surrender. They expect compliance. Americans are practical, not fanatics. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe responds with single word. Nuts. Translation required for German officers meant essentially, go to hell. 101st holds against repeated assaults. When weather clears, American transport planes arrive with supplies. Not just ammunition and medical supplies. Christmas dinner, turkey and fixings, dropped in insulated containers to surrounded soldiers. Germans watching through binoculars must have understood. An army that can deliver Christmas dinner to encircled troops is an army that possesses logistics beyond defeat. Bulge offensive collapses after 3 weeks. Every German assumption proved false. American units fought stubbornly even when surrounded. Supply lines disrupted but never severed. Too many routes, too many vehicles. Allied air power returned with devastating effect. Wehrmacht had launched offensive with carefully hoarded reserves, last strategic forces Germany possessed. Americans absorbed blow and counterattacked with divisions that seemed to appear from nowhere. Because American army now so large, even major redeployments were manageable. By early 1945, German generals writing very different assessments. Von Rundstedt admitted to staff that Americans had proven exceptional soldiers, not in Prussian sense of rigid discipline, but in more important metric of military effectiveness. They learned from mistakes, adapted to circumstances, possessed logistical capabilities that made attrition warfare obsolete. Most importantly, they demonstrated democracy. Far from being weakness, was strategic strength. Democratic society with industrial capacity could mobilize resources on scale autocratic regimes could only envy. Captured German documents revealed transformation. 1942 reports described Americans: unorganisiert, disziplinlos, weich, unorganized, undisciplined, soft. 1945 reports used different vocabulary: materiell überlegen, logistisch brillant, unaufhaltsam, materially superior, logistically brilliant, unstoppable. Summer 1945. American soldiers occupying German towns. Civilians who'd been taught to fear them found soldiers sharing rations, playing with children, helping clear rubble. Conquerors behaving like neighbors, warriors bringing chocolate instead of terror. German children taught Americans were brutal subhumans, discovered American soldiers gave them chocolate and gum. German women, expecting worst, found occupation forces generally disciplined and respectful. The chocolate bars weren't strategic calculations, simple human gestures, casual generosity of men who had enough to share. 16 million men and women mobilized, 300,000 aircraft produced, 87,000 tanks, 2 million trucks. 41 billion rounds of ammunition, 2 ocean navy built from obsolescence to dominance in under 4 years, all while raising civilian living standards, while maintaining democratic institutions, while arguing about strategy in newspapers, while conducting elections on schedule. Franklin Roosevelt ran for re-election 1944, middle of greatest war in history. Soldiers voted from foxholes in France and jungles in Pacific. Concept would have seemed insane to German leadership. German generals had been right. American soldiers were different. Not Prussian automatons marching in perfect formation. Truck drivers and farmers, factory workers and students. Men who argued with sergeants, questioned officers, maintained casual informality no European army would tolerate. Civilians in uniform. But that civilian sensibility proved to be strength. When German units were cut off from command, they became paralyzed, waiting for orders. When American units were cut off, junior officers took initiative, made decisions, adapted tactics. The lack of rigid discipline meant no rigid doctrine to constrain creative problem-solving. The chocolate bars remained long after guns fell silent. In post-war Germany, in Marshall Plan rebuilding, in Cold War that followed. They became symbol of what Germans had failed to understand, that abundance could be weaponized, that prosperity organized for purpose was more powerful than discipline organized for control, that democracy wasn't weakness but the ultimate strategic advantage. But here's what the history books don't tell you about those chocolate bars. After the war, Hershey's examined the Ration D-bar program and discovered something remarkable in the production data. The bars American soldiers carried weren't just emergency rations. They were psychological warfare prototypes that would influence everything from Cold War aid programs to modern humanitarian intervention. The story of what happened when CIA analysts reverse-engineered the chocolate bar effect. In the 1950s, when they realized that abundance as weapon could win conflicts without firing shots. That's a story about how America learned to wage economic war so effectively that the Soviet Union collapsed without invasion. About how the Marshall Plan was essentially the chocolate bar strategy applied at national scale. Please subscribe to keep us going forward, but that's a different chapter. One that starts with a question. If chocolate bars could demoralize the Wehrmacht, what could entire economies of abundance accomplish against communist scarcity? The answer changed the world. And it started with 16 million Americans who proved that amateurs with resources will always beat professionals with pride.